and welcome to EDU 6350 Week 4. This week we are going to be covering two chapters, Chapters 7 and 8, which fall under the categories of data and evidence in informed decision making. So we're going to look first at Chapter 7. In Chapter 7, there's a big emphasis on meeting the needs of students. And the author actually splits these two types of needs into levels and types. So I want us to just take a quick look. I'm on actually page 140 of the book, where it begins to talk about the levels of student needs. So in the human level, they're really talking about common things like as food, clothing, shelter, and good health. And as an educator in the school system, it is up to us to recognize whether or not a child has all of those things. Are they being fed at home? Are they receiving adequate clothing, shelter, and are their health needs being attended to? And if not, to hook the families up with the organizations that will help them. At the national level, basically our national level wants each student to be able to think, be literate in English, and to be prepared for either college or careers. So if you're planning the curriculum at the national level, they need to recognize the changing needs of students. Technology has really come to light in the past several years, and so we need to make sure that our students are becoming technologically savvy. There's also data available at the national level to tell us how students are doing in comparison with other nations. The National Assessment of Education Progress gives us some of those, and we can see the data at specific grade levels and subject areas. As far as the state or regional levels, the state really wants us to prepare for specific careers that may be more appropriate in our area. For instance, in Florida, we might be preparing for hospitality jobs because of our tourism, or for environmental engineers, water management specialists, and biologists because of being surrounded by water. The community is also a level that is very important. For us in the state of Florida, we have a lot of citrus. And students that grow up in a citrus community have some demands that are different from those that are living maybe in the center of the state where tourism seems to be more prevalent. So we have to keep that in mind when designing curriculum. At the school level, it is important because even in a district, schools are very, very different. And we need to keep that in mind when looking at curriculum and how to implement that. For instance, in the eastern part of Polk County, where the citrus industry is more prevalent, children come in at different parts of the year, different times of the year, depending upon the season. If it's a citrus community like for oranges or grapefruit, they might come in October and leave in March. If it's the strawberry industry, they might come in December and leave more in June. So it really depends upon when the children are there and what expectations we have as far as curriculum goes and how that curriculum will be implemented. And then, of course, we have the individual needs of the student, and that needs to be looked at in the particular schools. So are we addressing the needs of the average student, the gifted, the challenged, maybe students that have health problems such as those with diabetes or those with other health problems such as those that might need occupational therapy? Are we addressing those that are withdrawn or maybe ADHD or maybe really creative? How are we meeting the needs of individual students? Our curriculum and our implementation of that curriculum need to be reflected to meet the needs of individual students. In addition, the types of student needs are actually very important. So they have physical and biological needs. So students need movement, exercise, rest, nutrition, and adequate medical care. We can definitely put some of those into practice in our classrooms by making sure that students are not sitting all day long. They also have socio-psychological needs. They need affection, acceptance, and approval. They need to feel like they belong and that they are achieving some sort of success and they are safe inside their classroom. So setting up a classroom community helps to meet these kind of needs. As far as their educational needs go, today the emphasis is really on reading, writing, and how students think. So how they arrive at their answers, thinking them to process and to problem solve. We are basically using standards in order to get to this, but arranging those standards in a certain order. And that leads us to the last type, which is the developmental. We all know that students develop at different speeds in their schooling, and teachers and curriculum specialists need to be aware of this. Usually what we use is called the scope and sequence of instruction, and you can see that by looking at your district's plan overall. So if it's elementary, you're looking at a K through 6 model. If it's middle school, you're looking at like a 6 through 9 model. If it's a high school, you're looking at 9 through 12. So your textbook says that George Morrison basically addressed the types of needs that children have as far as developmental needs go. And he saw 4 types of needs. Basically multicultural, cultural diversity, gender, and then special needs. So we're looking at those types of things when we're looking at the developmental needs of students. The authors continue to talk about the needs of society, and you can see how these are laid out as well. They start very broad and then go down to the community and the neighborhood that the child may live in. Then there are also social processes that are discussed within the text. One in particular that I think really applies in the classroom is on page 150, talking about situations calling for growth in social participation, the person-to-person relationships, the group membership, and the intergroup relationships. Basically teaching children how to work with one another. There are also curriculum needs that come from subject matter, so changes in the disciplines. Disciplines over time have changed. What seemed to be important 15, 20 years ago is not as important now. Cursive writing is one of those examples. It seemed to kind of have a lull for a little while, now it's coming back, but it really depends on what the needs are at the current time. We are really tied to curriculum objectives and standards right now. And the standards in the state of Florida come from Common Core, but then the state has adopted them and done a few tweaks here and there. So we have to be aware of what is required in our objectives and standards in order to plan curriculum and implement it. There is also something called perceptual needs and data analysis. And it really is exactly what it says as far as something that's perceived. So maybe a parent might be asked, how well their child is learning math or how well their child is learning English. What do you think the school should offer? And in those particular cases, you might get a need that maybe you didn't think about before as a curriculum specialist. So those are important. And then also actual data collection and analysis based upon how students are actually doing in a particular area will help drive a need for stronger curriculum and implementation of that curriculum. Now take a few minutes and think about your own context. Compare and contrast the sources of needs in your education community and think about the opportunities and challenge of each source of educational need in your context. Also think about an approach to discovering the unmet needs and to hypothesize future needs of learners, because that's very, very important. Think about what the students are not learning that you believe that they really need to learn and needs to be included in a curriculum. In Chapter 8, we discuss curriculum goals and overarching ideas and objectives and standards. This is very, very important to us who are in the classroom at this point. First thing I wanted to show you is this table of traditional versus standards-based academic language. So really your traditional language was used, I would say, in the early 90s, maybe even up through like 94-ish and back. So those were the terms that were used, and now what we are using. So you can see we have a mission or purpose. Our curriculum goals are now called our overarching ideas. We don't really have curriculum objectives now. We get standards for those. We have an essential question, which is the big idea that we're trying to learn, and then short-term measurable outcomes or learning targets. We do still measure, but we're looking for that success criteria, the evidence, and then we've divided up our assessments and tests into both formative and summative. So the formative are those informal or formal checks. We may or may not take grades on them, but it still tells us how the children, how the students are doing in meeting the learning targets. The summative assessments they're basically the tests that tell us how the students are actually doing in meeting the target. We typically take a grade on the summative assessments. I want to show you a couple of sample curriculum guides from our district. We're going to start with English Language Arts. This particular curriculum guide goes with the Reading Basal series, which is Reading Wonders. So we're not going to look into detail. I just wanted you to see how it's laid out at the elementary level. You can see what the standards are that are tested weekly, and then other standards that are incorporated along with a content standard, or several of them, in this case science. There's key strategies, each of the major components of reading and writing and grammar that are included on this first page. Secondly, they suggest ideas for differentiation, for whole group instruction, for informal checks, and then there are teacher resources there at the bottom. So I think this is a pretty good sample of what a curriculum guide should look like, stressing that it is a guide. Very novice teachers that have just entered the profession, are more likely to need this particular guide. Whether they think they need it or not, they do, in order to stay focused and know exactly the standards that they should be teaching that particular week. More experienced teachers, as long as the standards don't change, they will begin to develop their own types of activities that they do in the classroom. So this one is math, so you can see it's laid out a little bit differently. Both of these were for 5th grade, so I'm just showing you how they can be laid out. We have the content standards in the second little box there, and then standards for mathematical practice, which are linked to the Common Core. So you can see that the state of Florida has different types of Common Core standards. So again, they have the standards at the top, and then instructional. Notice it says recommendations. Here are some suggestions and resources. I really like that they include math literature there to be read to the students, and writing prompts. Again, vocabulary is included. It would be great if they included the meanings of those, because I think they could be easily confused. And then formative assessment ideas, some mathematical tasks to do. They're word problem type things, but they're more than word problems. And then I really, really like the possible misconceptions that can be there. I think that's very important for teachers of math. Finally, it follows up with some more resources that could actually help the teacher. These are not really instructional resources, but they're professional resources. In order to develop good curriculum guides, sort of like the ones that I just showed you, it takes a team. So here are some things for you to think about as you're reading this chapter. Think about the various stakeholder positions that should make up the collaborative curriculum team, and then the functions of that curriculum team. What needs to be established to assure that all perspectives of stakeholders, remember all the people involved, are considered and all of those needs are met. Now reflect on your own context. So how do current trends in curriculum and instruction in the standards-based environment, how do you think they're going to continue to evolve in the direction that we are going now? And how do you think curriculum trends in the for-profit, private, and charter education environments will evolve? How can people, basically leaders, curriculum specialists, developers, and teachers, become more adjustable to those potential changes? As always, if you have any questions or comments, start with the weekly blog. I think that's a great place for us to begin discussing these things, and then you can always email me as your instructor. Have a great week.